Solutions.com.
21st Century Radio is sponsored by Hieronimus and Company. Now more of 21st Century Radio with your host, Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
I am a human. Well, I am a child like her. And if you look into my eyes, deep down there's a light. I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Jew. It shouldn't matter to you. I'm not a capitalist, and I'm not a communist. I'm not a socialist. I'm not the politics. Tell me, are these the reasons you can't live right? I am a human.
Oh, that's our dear friend Ziggy Marley. And Ziggy, we hope to be carrying you up to Woodstock in our Woodstock bus this coming, it's next August, the 50th anniversary. Ah, yes. Well, welcome back to 21st Century Radio, and congratulations to Fox 45 for pointing out that Trump still loves Putin and Russia more than he loves America. Yep, that's telling the truth. That was right on the head. Congratulations, guys. You can see like everybody else. Open your eyes. Our guest is Jason Louv, John Dee and the Empire of Angels, Enochian Magic and the Occult Roots of the Modern World, Inner Traditions International, on the web at jasonlouv, LOUV.com or magic.me. There, okay. Boy, Jason, you still there?
Still there. That's Magick with a K, by the way, Magick, where I teach magic, shamanism, ritual, all that great stuff.
All the great stuff. And all the great stuff that a lot of people are going to be studying in the future, because things are going to change radically. We're going to have to turn inwards. Let's face it.
I agree. At this point, I will say that, I've been into this stuff for 20 years now, and nobody ever took it seriously. It was like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. But now everything's so twisted and desperate that people are like, why not?
Well, who would have ever heard, I never would have thought that Fox 45 would have basically come out and said what they just said, that Trump has still yet to say that Russia had anything to do with it, when most of the country knows that. The rest of the world knows that. But unfortunately, I think he thinks he can hide everything. But he's not as smart as he thinks he is. Let's just put it that way. Now, but you are as smart as you think you are, right?
Not too hard to be smarter than Trump, so I'll accept that one. There's I can still be humble and say that's true. So
yeah. Well, let's see. I have so many good questions I got to ask you. Literal readings of the scripture were inevitable, a consequence of the printing press. That's what I learned from you. And I didn't want to spend much time on that, but I did want to mention that. Would you say a couple of sentences about that, though?
Yeah, I think that's very straightforward, in the sense that, if we look back at history, of course, the Christianity swept through Europe following the conversion of Constantine to Christianity, and then the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity in the 4th century, and all of Europe became Catholicized and Christian, but literacy rates were low. I mean, or practically non-existent. Only the clergy was literate. The peasantry was too busy tilling the fields, and the nobility, by and large, was in many cases not literate either, because it was the business of the nobility to fight and hold territory and so on. The clergy, for the most part, were the only literate class, and so, of course, they were educated in Greek and Latin, and could read the Bible in Latin because it hadn't been translated into other languages. They were reading it in the original Latin. So the standard setup was, there would be the local church wherever you happen to live, and the priest or the priests, the clergy, would have access to a Bible which would have been written in Latin, and they would have been essentially giving sermons and preaching from it and drawing on it for their own inspiration. But the lay people were not directly reading the book. It was being delivered to them by the clergy. And so, of course, that allowed for a situation in which essentially there was an imbalance of power. The clergy could say whatever they wanted. Yeah. They could basically make up whatever they wanted and say it was the word of God, or simply, they were just the sole source of truth, even if they were being, giving an accurate representation. Or there might not have been a Bible at all. There might not have been access to it. So this changed radically in when the printing press happened. So of course, prior to this, when Europe had been totally Catholic, there was a really, laid back attitude towards religion. For the most part, Europe was, the attitude was do what you got to do and then confess on Sunday and everything's fine. It's like there was a very accepting and tolerant view of human nature that we still see in some Catholic countries. Not the evangelical fury that comes from Protestantism. I'm not making a judgment on either of those religions. I'm just saying that there are certain features to each of them, but pros and cons. But when the printing press happened and everyone was able to start reading the Bible for themselves, of course, there were specific historical incidents like the Reformation and Luther and Calvin and all of this. But it was, it's pretty easy to see that people read the book and then they said, wait, well, this isn't what people have been telling us. This is, this is this incredible, beautiful, harrowing, terrifying book with so much information in it. It's an incredibly dense book, the history of thousands of years. But people, would of course have the idea that they would have, it was the word of God, and that therefore they had to A, take it literally, and B, that what they were getting in church just wasn't matching up with what was promised on paper. I mean, this is true across the board of human experience. I mean, the experience never quite matches the manual, whether that's Christianity or, anything in life. Life is not what you read in books. But of course, when it's the Bible, when people are operating on that as if that's the literal word of God, then of course they would take it literally, and of course they would want to literally enact it in the world. I don't think it could have been any other way, particularly since high literacy rates were new to Europe. It was one thing that for people to start reading in larger numbers, that's a quantum leap for humanity to then, or certainly European civilization at that time, to then expect people to understand abstract thinking and metaphor and literary analysis and be able to understand that what they're reading is perhaps not literally true, but is a parable and a metaphor about human nature, and that, for instance, the war between God and Satan in Revelation represents a deeper truth, the truth of the war between good and evil in every human heart, and is a dramatization of that, just like modern movies are in a way, but like religions across the world are filled with stories like that. For instance, the Ramayana in Hinduism, the Mahabharata War, or the Romance of the Three Kingdoms in China. The religions all have great epic stories about the battles between the gods and the demons, and the fight between good and evil, and ethics and morals are demonstrated to children that way. As a way of passing on continuity of culture. But unfortunately, because we went into literacy, of course that was good, but of course people would take it literally, and that's really where we inherit evangelical Christianity from. It's that moment when this very intense and often very negative book, the Bible, if you take it literally, I mean, there's some really destructive and horrifying stuff in that book, along with all the beautiful and wonderful things.
Yeah.
It's that moment of the collision of a newly literate, peasantry and a newly literate society, let's just say, with a book that is pretty frightening if you take it literally. We're still in the shadow of that.
Well, or also at that time period, and went for centuries, women were not allowed to read the Bible. There are stories that I've read before that they would, if they were found reading the Bible, they had some serious problems. So I'm glad that that's changed. At least superficially, it's changed anyway.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think that medieval medieval Europe is, there are some parts of the Middle East that are very similar. It's like what we see in some, there are many parts of the world that are still religious. America is becoming one of them very quickly, but there are lots of parts of the world that are similar to what Europe was at the time, which was an extremely repressive theocracy.
Yeah. Well, I got a real tough question for you right now, so you better get ready for this one.
Oh, good.
It is your contention that the angelic system of John Dee and Edward Kelly has been the central core of Western esoteric tradition in its post-Renaissance form and has been at the heart of Rosicrucianism and Scottish Rite Freemasonry, the Golden Dawn, Telema. Now, I want you to elaborate on that idea, but I also wanted to point out that there has been, especially from the far right, the damning, literally, of anyone that gets involved in any secret society like Freemasonry or Rosicrucians. And that really has been, to me, extremely destructive. What do you got to say about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, if you're interested in this stuff and you live in America, it's never far from your mind. But this is one of the great ironies of spirituality and religious history, because both of these things really do come from the same place.
Yep, that's right.
They're maybe, it's some sibling rivalry. But, well, first let's do this. What is the occult, right? What is Western esotericism? Because that's a big enough subject. It's something that's so poorly understood. Everybody has conceptions about it, from Hollywood or from the religious propaganda that you've mentioned. And so let's clearly define what it is. So earlier we talked about the great chain of being and the idea that one could, see the universe as a coherent pattern. Essentially, the idea is that if God created man and the universe in his image, then it must be intelligible, and that the more you understand the world and human nature, the more you thereby fall and understand God. To understand God, look at his creation and understand the patterns in it. Things like mathematical constants. Why are there mathematical constants expressed all throughout nature? Is that, certainly to John Dee's mind, that suggested that there was some type of guiding intelligence behind the creation of reality. And as a scientist and a magician, he thought that the more you understood reality, it's like, well, you can't meet God face to face, but you can understand his creation. And by understanding his creation, you're understanding him in a mirror, in a way, as above, so below. You understand one, you understand the other, because, of course, in the Bible it says God created the earth and the heavens and created man in his image. Well, that suggests that, there's all these things follow the same logic, or pattern of creation. So it's really the idea that one can become closer to God by understanding one's own nature, by reducing one's own sinfulness, by following Scripture, and then by making direct experimental efforts into understanding what reality is. That one can thereby understand nature. If one can understand the laws by which God created everything, then one can, at least the Hermeticists thought, participate in that creation, or at the very least dance according to the tune. If you can see the script and the writing on the walls of eternity, then you can follow it and know your role in life. And at the very least, this is a great goal for people, to know their role in life and know what's been set out for them in the divine plan. Mm-hmm. But it turns out to be easier said than done, because people have so many distractions and they're so easily distracted by their lower nature and that type of thing. So that's really what magic is. And these ideas were formalized as time went on into Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, the Golden Dawn, things like that. But they were still in embryonic form during Dee's time, or not embryonic, it was all there, but it just hadn't been quite so formalized. That's really what the occult is. The occult, Western esotericism, is the secret spiritual tradition in Western culture, just like, perhaps there are certainly secret, inner esoteric traditions in other cultures. So, Sufism in Islam, or Tantra in Buddhism and Hinduism and that type of thing. And that's really what the Western esotericism is. And so Dee to my mind, is the greatest practitioner of the field. He's really the central figure of the whole thing. And what Dee did is synthesize all of the intellectual streams that had been floating around Europe at that time in the occult and into a coherent whole, and then made, at least to his mind, made contact with the angels, and the angels claimed to deliver Enochian, which is what everyone wanted. They wanted to know the primal language of reality. They wanted to know how God created existence, and the angels delivered those schematics to Dee and Kelly. What that means is that ever since, all these secret societies that have sprouted up, I mean, Dee really fulfilled the goals of the Western esoteric tradition in the 16th century. His work was the crowning achievement of the field. And then from there, what happened was the birth of modern science, because the same fundamental suppositions, the idea that one could change reality by experimenting on it, became modern science, and they just became more about the material world than the spiritual world. And then there was a clear line of evolution from alchemy and magic into science. But the spiritual side lingered on and continued in the underground, and it had to continue in the underground because of the fear of church persecution. And Dee fulfilled the goals by delivering Enochian in a way. And so what that means is that ever since, the small occult groups that have sprouted up throughout history have really been trying to come to terms with what he did. And Enochian has made its way into all of these systems, and particularly the Golden Dawn and Thelema. And it really wasn't until the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century that people really started to make headway with Dee's work again. And that, of course, was the Golden Dawn and Crowley, who I also cover in the book. But yeah, it's right there. It's the driving force of the whole thing.
And the driving force of our whole thing right now is to take a break. That's what we got to do. Rules and regulations, 506 of the Penal Code. And we always pay attention to those penal codes. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier was about John Dee's library. And the size of it, bigger than anybody, just about bigger than anybody else. And yet he was poor. And he went out and bought so many books, but then he actually gave away little parts of libraries to people. Just an extraordinary soul. Well, time out here on the playing field, and we'll be back with Jason Louv, John Dee and the Empire of Angels. JasonLouv.com or Magick.me.
Hello, this is Edgar Evans Casey, the son of Edgar Casey, the famous psychic. This is 21st Century Radio, and I'm speaking with Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
Edgar Casey's people, boy, what good times we used to have with those guys down there in Virginia Beach. Indeed, this is 21st Century Radio. I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus, and our guest is Jason Louv. John Dee and the Empire of Angels. Yes, we've mentioned the name of his book a number of times, but we got a deal for you, and this is what the deal is. If you purchase a copy of John Dee and the Empire of Angels, the Enochian Magic and the Occult Roots of the Modern World by Intertraditions International, and you can prove it, yeah, that's easy to do, and plenty of you guys have done this before when we had this deal, you can choose any book that my wife, myself, or any book that we've had on the air for over 32 years of broadcasting. And that goes back way, way back there. And it's yours, free, absolutely free. Just purchase a copy of John Dee and the Empire of Angels. You won't regret it. Now, I've got to get back to some other questions that are just as important. What is Hermetic Magic?
Yes. Well, Hermetic Magic is very simple. And it's summarized by one lyric from a song from the 80s by the band The Smiths. It's nature is a language can't you read?
Oh.
And it's what I've alluded to earlier, the idea that everything is similar. Really the universe is one thing, one substance, as it says in the Emerald Tablet of Hermes. if everything is one thing, then the same signature repeats on all levels. It's very similar to a hologram. So if you take and I mean not a projected hologram, but a traditional hologram, you might remember getting baseball cards that were holographic or something like that.
Sure.
Like a hologram you could hold and you move and the image moves. Now, if you take a hologram, a printed hologram, and you cut it up, every single piece that you cut up will have the exact same image. It'll just be smaller. This is how the Hermeticists saw the world. They thought that, as William Blake said, you could contemplate eternity within a grain of sand. That the universe and man and plants and animals and God and everything follows the same structure. One way you can see this or demonstrate this to yourself, if this is perhaps alluding to something that might be true, is to look at pictures of nebulas. There are tons of nebulas that look exactly like the human eye, that are indistinguishable from the iris of the human eye. Now, of course, a more skeptical person would say, well, human beings see themselves in everything. I mean, you can see a human face in a wall socket also. But for the Hermetic thinker, for the magical thinker, or perhaps the more artistic and poetic thinker, this suggested that, everything is one thing, that the same signatures repeat on all levels. Or as they would see it, that if God created the universe in his own image, then you could study anything and everything in reality to understand the whole. As if man is created in God's image, then one can study man to understand God, and vice versa. So,
the old as above, so below. Excuse me, I just yelled out there. The old as above, so below reference.
That's right.
Well, what were angelic conversations?
So the angelic conversations were the sessions that Dee and Kelly had, where Hermeticism was really a philosophy, by the way. It was a philosophy that was kind of the forerunner of science and was in the popular among the intellectual elite in Europe, but not for the masses. It was kind of something that people were interested in behind closed doors because the church was not particularly fond of it. But operative magic was something else completely. Hermeticism, if Hermeticism was a philosophy, I like to look at it like this. If we see the universe as a computer, as many people from this time did in a sense, if the universe is a computer, then Hermeticism was an attempt to understand the operating system by which it runs. People thought that if they could just understand how the universe works, they would be able to properly fit themselves within it and know what reality is. I mean, this has been the eternal quest of man. Understand what's the meaning of life, right? But they literally saw the universe as a computer operating system, and they wanted to understand where all the files and folders went and how things ran and all that, and how things were, why things happened. The programs that carried things out, which they saw as angels and spirits and that type of thing. It's no mistake that we talk about the phrase daemon, daemons in computers, it's very similar to the demons or Socrates' daemon. Anyways, if Hermeticism is trying to find the operating system of reality, then operative magic is trying to hack it and change the code and write computer programs that do new and novel things and actively change it. And that was a much more shocking idea to people than just Hermeticism. It was an even more underground idea and a more potentially dangerous and even fatal one, because people who were into this were not looked kindly upon. Although behind closed doors, every government in Europe was employing operative magicians to carry out their own desires, using occult techniques. John Dee being one of them.
Yeah.
So the angelic sessions were Dee's attempt. Now, we have to remember that Dee was the most highly trained scientist of his day, the brightest individual, the most advanced mathematical thinker, at least in England. And it's fascinating to see somebody with a mind like that, a trained scientist, bring that intellect and that level of rigor to the field of the occult, because the type of people that usually become interested in the occult are not so intellectually erudite or well-trained or scientifically minded. It's actually a very, very rare thing. So Dee brought a whole new level of rigor and precision to it, and the results were the angelic conversations from which they retrieved the Enochian system and the Enochian language, which were written up in Dee's various books, which are now in the British Library and that have been drawn upon by all these occult groups to try and resurrect what they can of Dee's work.
Well, I love that part of your books when you're talking about some of the conversations, because it seemed to me that the angels really were pretty demanding, weren't they? They were not just sitting around allowing you to say or do anything you wanted.
Absolutely. The angels were, very Old Testament. From the perspective of the angels, they didn't really care how smart Dee was, because for them, and this is the great, quite humorous in a way. So you have to imagine somebody like Dee with, all his intellectual training and library and all that was sufficient was to create a footstool that he could kind of stand on to see slightly higher than the other, humans around him, so that he could just begin to reach towards making contact with the angels. But of course, the angels are a whole other arc of evolution higher than humanity, at least in the medieval way of thinking, or Renaissance way of thinking. And so their intelligence is far beyond humans. And so, but from the perspective of the angels, all humans are sinful and fallen without exception. They right. Pretty much straightforward repeat the things that are in the Bible. So they were consistently furious with Dee and Kelly and humanity in general, and their opinion was simply that humans were sinful and fallen and needed to repent, and this was the most important thing because the end was at hand. And of course, people always look at ideas of the apocalypse. Everyone's always saying the apocalypse is coming and it never comes. But in my way of thinking, they're just they're not zooming out far enough. I think that if things like, I'm agnostic, but if things like spirits and angels and so forth really exist, they very likely see time very differently than human beings. Human beings have very short lifespans, 70, 80 years, and that's it. Yeah. But for an angel or a being that is in theory around for thousands of years, they very likely see time very differently. So when an angel says the end of the world is nigh, repent in 1585, it of course follows logically that nothing would happen that year, and the human beings hearing that would be quite disappointed and disillusioned. But just pull back a little bit. Here we are, it's 2018, and you've just said that, the New York Times has said that we've passed the threshold for any potential to save the world. So were they wrong, or were they just speaking on a longer time frame? And what is the apocalypse really? Is it like a Hollywood type event, like they think in the Left Behind books, where the heavens open up and angels and demons literally duke it out for humanity? Or is it something that takes place over a very elongated time span in a very subtle way, in which people have many, many, many chances to change and take a new path, but usually don't, let's be honest. And it's, is it a slow, long degradation of the natural world and mankind and human dignity and human institutions and mankind's connection with the divine realms, a slow slide into oblivion, rather than some Hollywood type one-off event?
Well, I'm going to change course here for just a minute. My favorite research on Dr. John Dee, and I know he wasn't really a doctor, I would have given him 5 Ph.D.s, is that found in the research books of Dame Frances Yates, who was my most favorite until I bumped into your book. What was her perspective?
She's wonderful.
Isn't she? Oh gosh,
that's quite a compliment, by the way. Thank you so
much.
much.
Well, but it's true. It's true because the perspective I needed was a bit more scientific than hers from that standpoint, and that's what I know you understand, and that's really, really key. But she was such a lovely lady, but could you tell us what was her perspective on John Dee? But I'm still going to call him Dr. John Dee.
Yeah. It sounds cool, right?
Yeah.
Dame Frances Yates, a brilliant academic, just centrally important to both she's centrally important to our understanding of history and science, but also, she was an academic in the 50s and 60s and 70s, and without her, there would be no serious academic study of the occult. It would have remained written off to history. Basically, the Yates thesis, as it's called, her real contribution to the field, outside of many brilliant books, her main thesis was that science was born out of alchemy. Prior to her work, people thought that alchemy was an aberration, that it wasn't in continuum with anything else, that there was just this crazy thing that people believed, and it was just pure superstition. And what she revealed through her work and her academic work is that actually it was all one continuum, that there was alchemy and magic, and the ideas of alchemy and magic were slowly refined into modern science. And it makes perfect sense. It's just like the more fantastic things that you read in the grimoires, or people like Cornelius Agrippa, the conjurations of demons and the direct alteration of reality and things like this. People were often disappointed when it didn't work, but the same general ideas, the idea that you could change reality, the idea that you had to undertake operations or rituals, this just became scientific experiments. The alchemist chamber became the scientist's laboratory, and people just began to refine the methods and refine the philosophy over time, and they began to focus more on the material world. And they never learned how to turn lead into gold, but just because that didn't quite work out for them, the same people who were trying to solve that problem went on unsuccessfully, went on to, or inspired other people who went on to successfully solve other problems, like the creation of the telescope, the birth of modern medicine, the creation of Francis Bacon's the Baconian method, which became the scientific method. And so Francis Yates basically said, alchemy is the parent of science, and that revolutionized the entire field. And it was the first time that the academia was forced to really seriously take a look at magic and say, actually, she's right. This is a whole part of history that we have just been we've ignored, and it's not like nothing happened before the creation of the Royal Society. So that's the Yates thesis, and then she went on to talk at length about the philosophy of people like Giordano Bruno and John Dee and Francis Bacon, and really showed how during the time science and spirituality were united, and there was really one intellectual quest. And this is the way that I see it too. There was one true intellectual quest, the pure intellectual quest, whether it's of science, of magic, of art, of literature, whatever it is, and that's to redeem humanity, to enlighten humanity, to improve the lot of humanity. And the perspective that people had at the time is the tools didn't matter. Whether it's science or magic, they saw it all as one thing. It was a whole. It was a holism. Now things are very much specialized and compartmentalized, and in a way that's a great tragedy, because when we're young, when we haven't had the curiosity beaten out of us yet, that's how we see the world. We just see it as we have pure intellectual curiosity, and we long to see everything in the world as one whole. But it's, then as time goes on, we're forced to focus just on one tiny corner of reality, whatever our job happens to become, and what role we end up playing in society. And then, of course, within the sciences, things are so specialized now that, scientists are not, certainly the way that the structure works, it just doesn't make sense financially to know everything, nor is it possible anymore. So, now people become very, very specialized and are within their own track and in their own world. And there's wonderful, wonderful things about that. Well, I love the idea of whole system thinking.
Well, we have to put that on pause there on the good old whole, well, goodness gracious. We're running out of time, and I've got so many more questions. You're so good at this. Congratulations. You just won a free trip to Bermuda and maybe a new haircut. Do you need a new haircut?
I very much need a new haircut and a trip to Bermuda. That would be lovely.
Yeah, we'll try to put them both together. But time out here on the playing field with Jason Louv. John Dee, The Empire of Angels, Enochian Magic, and the Occult Roots of Modern World Intertraditions International on the web at jasonlouv, Louv.com or magic.me.
Elaine Pagels, author of the Gnostic Gospels, and also of a new book called Revelation, Visions, Prophecy, and Politics in the Book of Revelation. I'm a professor of religion at Princeton University, and you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
Oh, Aunt Elaine. We haven't heard from her in a couple of months. What's going on with Aunt Elaine now? Is she still down there in southwest of the United States doing some other work, Lars? Huh? I think that's exactly where she is. Boy, did she teach me a lot. Well, another person that's taught me a hell of a lot is Jason Louv, and he's with us now, and we're in the last 20 minutes of the show. I wish we had more time, but we don't. John D. and the Empire of Angels. Remember, if you purchase a copy of this book, and you can prove it, all you got to do is show us a receipt. You can choose any book that I've written or Zoe's written, or any book that we've ever had on the air. We have all the way going back to 32 years of our broadcasting here. And choose, just take your pick. So let's get back to Jason here. Jason, we're in the last minutes of this, Jason. And I've got to be careful about my questions here. Enochian Magic, well, how does it work?
Oh, well. By the way, how cool to hear from Elaine Pagels. Her book Revelations was very, very helpful.
Was it? Yeah.
In my research. She's great. She's wonderful.
Yeah.
So Enochian Magic. Enochian Magic, in my experience, is the one type of magic that works like it does in the movies, meaning you read something from an incantation from a page and something dramatic happens. And by something dramatic, I mean a radical alteration in your perceptions of reality. Enochian is a vast and massive system. It's hard to encapsulate, but learning it is very similar to learning some type of advanced computer programming language or something like that, or perhaps learning the intricacies of how a physical computer is put together, along with learning the programming language in the case of the Enochian language. Enochian is a system for taking a unevolved human being, a very animalistic in outlook human being, and enlightening them. It's the closest system that Western magic has to what the Eastern systems call enlightenment, and they have yogic techniques and various other meditative techniques for getting there. Western magic has Enochian, which is a very direct path, so direct that it can be quite apocalyptic in a sense. Apocalyptic meaning the person that goes into Enochian magic does not come out the same person on the other side. Mm-hmm. The narrative that one takes into that of who they are doesn't get to survive. So it's not a light matter. It's not for dabblers. It's for somebody who wants to be enlightened and know the truth. And the truth not meaning a dogma or a religion or something that you can write down, but understanding the fundamental nature of reality. That's what Enochian does. It provides revelation, if done sincerely, and it takes quite a bit of effort, although it can happen very quickly as well. So to my mind, Enochian is the centralmost and perhaps most valid form of magic in the Western canon, and there's all kinds of aspects to it. It's phenomenally complex and also very straightforward and simple.
What is the importance of Dee's Moniz Hieroglyphica, and why did Dee believe that revealing the mysteries of the Moniz to the profane would lead to their misuse and therefore to disaster?
Yes. So the Moniz Hieroglyphica was really kind of Dee's thesis in a way. It was the crowning achievement of his academic work. And it's both a symbol and a book. It's a symbol that he believed he distilled the entirety of reality down into, and the key of the mysteries, and the key of alchemy, and the key of understanding what reality is. And he presented it to the various monarchs of Europe, including Maximilian II, or Maximilian I, rather, the Holy Roman Emperor. He presented it to him as containing the secrets of alchemy, but to Dee's mind, the secrets of alchemy meant the secrets of enlightenment, the secret of turning a soul from lead to gold. But monarchs of Europe weren't interested in that. They just wanted something that would make gold. So they weren't particularly interested in the Moniz. And this is one of the reasons why Dee kept his things coded and secret, because he understood human nature. He understood that human beings are fundamentally greedy and not particularly concerned with the higher heights of philosophy or spirituality. They just want to get ahead at the cost of the people around them. So the secrets of magic can sometimes, be a bit dangerous in the hands of people like that, or certainly just profaned and misused and made tacky. Let's put it like that. Mm-hmm. So he wrote in a way that made it very hard to interpret if you didn't have his background, and that was good and bad. It was good because he achieved his goal of keeping the secrets out of the hands of the profane, although it was bad in the sense that nobody understood what he was talking about. And Dee was perpetually ignored for his entire life, and no one understood him or took him seriously because he just wasn't very good at communicating his ideas.
Mm-hmm. Well, you state that Queen Elizabeth I was a genius, Dee's equal or better, and she practiced operative magic in her own ways, such as the royal touch. What was the royal touch?
The royal touch was a healing ritual where people could, on a certain day, they could line up at, I believe, either Whitehall or Buckingham Palace if they had maladies like toothaches or, a bad knee or something like that. And Elizabeth would lay her hands upon them. It was kind of like, laying on of hands. And many people, it was like faith healing. And many people claimed that they were cured of maladies this way. Now, clearly, we have to take that with more than a grain of salt because clearly there's a lot of showmanship there and a lot of power of suggestion, and it's the Queen after all. It's got to be a heightened experience to go through something like that. But we also have to imagine that it wouldn't have been very wise to run around saying that the Queen hadn't healed you. Mm-hmm. That would have been treason. And right. You would have been put in the Tower of London or just killed. So that's probably biased data. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, this question is something that I wish we could have a lot of time on, and that is the British Empire was not without its atrocities. What were some of its worst atrocities?
Yeah. Well, we got to bear in mind the British Empire at its height controlled a fourth of the planet. It was called the Empire, the sun upon which the sun never sets, for a reason. So the sun was always up somewhere in its territories, and it was, the English brutally conquered a lot of the world. Yeah. And the body count was much higher than, I think the body count on the British Empire was perhaps higher than certainly World War II. It was higher than Hitler or I believe Stalin. Because it was all over the world. But some of the worst ones, the ones that particularly stand out, there's so many. But the famine in Bengal, 19 million Bengalis were starved, under the Raj. There were insurgencies and, very cruelly put down in Papua New Guinea and Australia. Of course, if we see if we see America as in some senses an extension of the British Empire, then we have to factor in all of the genocides of the genocide of the Native American Indians, which is incalculable. They just there's no way to get a precise number on it, particularly because of the spread of smallpox and things like that. So a lot of the world was, brutally, there was some very, very some huge atrocities, and there have been some historians, particularly Neil Ferguson, who have said that the British Empire, despite all that, was still the most humane and liberal of all the empires, and that the other world empires, particularly Spain and the French, were far more savage, and that it was England, the English Empire was the best of all possible empires, but. He's very iconoclastic. The truth is a lot of people died and a lot of people suffered, and a lot of it was done in the name of the spread of Christianity and the civilizing force of England, and that, that England was here to civilize and save the world. And that's real. I mean, we still live in the shadow of that suffering. And of course, it wasn't just the English, it was all the imperial powers. But we can't ignore that either. I mean, the death toll was massive. And by the way, a lot of the death toll we just don't know because the British Foreign Office illegally destroyed a lot of the files for it in the 1960s. That's happening now, by the way. I mean, Trump is very busy destroying a lot of the records of his administration. So there's a lot when the history books are written. There's a lot about the Trump administration that we just may not know. We may not ever know the extent of, for instance, what they've done at the border, or what they've done to people trying to come into the country and things like that, and I suspect that there's a lot of what's happening right now we don't know about and will come out, and people will ask, how could this have happened? Well, right under our noses. Well, it's like people have been telling us that this has been happening, but we haven't been paying attention to the things like concentration camps being built in America for people trying to come into the country and this type of thing. And so it's very likely that we, just as an aside, just because history does repeat, and that's the point of studying history, it's very likely that a lot of, more information will come out, but it's possible that we may not ever know the extent of what's happening right now, because Trump, much like the British Empire, the Trump administration is very actively shredding their files and destroying records of what their administration has done. I think because they know their time is limited, and as soon as their power wanes, it's they're going to have to watch. Things will be very different.
Well, there certainly is, and the Republican Party will be destroyed, which is very unfortunate, because I knew a lot of good Republicans. Still am friends with some, but none of them like Trump, though, from that standpoint.
It is unfortunate, and that's what I was alluding to. I think that the core, the good core of the Republican Party, the good fiscal, the compassionate conservatism, if you will. I mean, maybe not even that, but the true religious side of it, the people truly believing that side of it, and the working financial parts of it.
We're out of time. We're out of time.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us, Jason. Hang on the line. See you next week. Zoe will see you. The Queen will see you next week.
You gotta spread the word. Tell them what you heard. We're gonna make a better day.
Stay connected and stay informed on the #1 news talk station, Talk Radio 680, WCBM, Baltimore, and WCBM.com.